Good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, a libertarian educational foundation, and it's nice to be back with you all for my weekly internet show. Exciting weekend this weekend over in Europe. There was the elections in Greece and then the elections in Egypt. And since both of those countries have a direct relationship to what's going on in the United States, thought I'd talk about it tonight. In Greece, the Greek people are trying to resolve a deadlock within the country over the bailout of Greece and whether Greece should remain part of the Eurozone, whether it should get out. Talking about excessive debt and excessive spending in Greece. And of course, everything there has come to a head. And it's just absolutely fascinating to watch the debate and the reaction of the Greek people. I mean, because in similar ways, it just the whole scenario mirrors what's going on in the United States. I mean, it's kind of amusing. You've got the Greek people saying we have a right to our dole. We've grown up with the dole. We've been receiving the dole for decades and maybe centuries or whatever. Our parents received the dole. Our great grandparents received the dole. Our grandparents received the dole, and we have a right to receive the dole ourselves. But they want their government to squeeze the society dry in order to continue funding the dole. But they are the society. That's what's really funny, is that they don't understand. The Greek people don't understand that in order for the government to give them their dole at this point of the whole thing, they've got to take the money from the people in order to give them the dole. So, like if somebody says, "Well, I'm entitled to my $1,000 a month or €1,000." I want the government to continue giving me my dole because I have a right to the dole. And the government says, okay, we're going to come over here and tax you $1,000 so that we can give you your dole. Everybody screams. Says, no, wait a minute. Don't tax me. Tax everyone else. But everybody's saying that. That's what's so funny about this thing. Everybody is saying, tax him. Don't tax me in order to get my dole. But him over there, he's saying the same thing. Oh, no, don't tax me, tax him in order to give me my dole. Well, obviously they've come to a position in the society where the tax base, the people, that they're looking to take money away, simply cannot, there's not enough wealth there to fund the continued dole state, and of course all the interest on the debt. I mean, they say, well, tax the rich, tax the rich. That's what American statists are saying. Hey, Greeks, go find the rich people and tax them. Well, you can only do that to a certain point. Let's assume they could find every rich person overnight, tax his wealth. What good's that do? I mean, it's a short-term solution where you're taking his money and you're giving it to the dole recipients. What do you do next year? You see, there's no more rich to tax because they've already taxed the rich, and so this is what is so fascinating about this thing, because you've got a society of people that have grown up in the dole society, just like here in the United States. It's really no different. In fact, the reason that I find it so interesting of what's happening over there is, number one, because it reflects in large part the view of the dole society over here, the people who support the dole society and believe in the dole society and so forth. But it also goes to show how similar the United States has become with respect to the European system. I mean, we once prided ourselves as being different from those people. That here in the United States, people had brought together a society that was totally different than the European status society that's existed for centuries. And yet now, you can see it in the Greek situation, we've copied them. I mean, that was really the significance of the Franklin Roosevelt Revolution, that we ended up adopting and embracing the European way of life that our ancestors had rebelled against. I mean, that was why they left Europe. They didn't want the paternalism. They didn't want the dolism. They didn't want the government taking care of people. They wanted a society in which people managed their own lives and created their own wealth and decided for themselves what to do with their own money. Spend it, charity, invest it, whatever. But with the Roosevelt Revolution, and even before that, the income tax and the Federal Reserve System, but Roosevelt really, he brought the whole thing up to a culmination that really revolutionized the American way of life, and in such a way that really we now have the same system that they do in Greece. Now, obviously, the situation is not as bad here, but it's heading in that direction. Because you see, theoretically, it's possible to have a dole society where what you're giving out in the dole is equal to what you're collecting in taxes. But what inevitably happens is the people that are on the dole, people see them, and they're people in the tax-paying part of the society see them, the dole recipients, and say, well, shoot, why should I be working when I can go out in the dole myself? And those are the people on the margin that are barely making it, you see, and they're saying, why should I go work 40 hours a week when I can collect, 60% of pay doing nothing? And so they tip over. Well, over a long period of time, the number of dole recipients starts growing and growing and growing. The amount they demand starts growing and growing and growing until finally the tax-paying side can't handle it anymore. And so, well, here's a way that we can look at this thing, really to just simplify things. There's two ways, basically, that you can organize a society. Let's say that the first way, let's say that people have a right to keep everything they earn in this society. And they're free to engage in any kind of economic enterprise without a permit, a license, or whatever. They just go out and open up a business, open up a trade or whatever. And then they have to depend on customers. And the customers, they're the ultimate sovereigns in this kind of society. They decide who's going to stay in business, who's going to go out of business with their buying habits. So here's a way of life where people are creating wealth through private transactions. Over time, they start saving some of that wealth. They start saving a huge pool of capital. That capital, is put in the banks, and the banks lend it out, and the businesses borrow the capital, and they get better tools and equipment. They expand their businesses. The workers in those businesses become more productive. They produce more wealth. That wealth then accrues to the business. The business now has the ability to pay higher wages, which in a free system it has to, because his competitors will outbid him and take away the workers. So you've got this society in which a constantly growing capital base is benefiting everyone. I mean, this is how standards of living rise, through real increases in pay rates and in profits, revenues. So you've got this massive accumulation of capital over time as a result of this free market system. And that was really the case with the United States. I mean, if you go through the first 100 and some odd years, no income tax, no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no immigration controls, no drug war, no Social Security, no Medicare, Medicaid, none of this statism. People kept everything they earned. And by the way, there was the greatest outburst of voluntary charity that mankind has ever seen during this period of time. Not only were the wealthy, people like John D. Rockefeller and so forth, not only were they, Gutenberg, donating money to the needy, sort of like Bill Gates does and so forth, but so was the middle class, and there were voluntary associations and so forth. This is what made America different. I mean, this is what was unique, because if you came to this country, the government wasn't going to help you. Imagine that. Imagine like going to a country where the government is prohibited from helping people. I mean, that's why America shocked the world. It was like, what kind of society is that over there? Mean, greedy people where they're not forcing people to care for the poor. They're not forcing people to care for their parents, and they're not forcing people to take care of their own retirement. And they're not putting people in jail for ingesting the wrong substances. It was an unbelievable society, and it shocked Europeans, it shocked Asians, but of course, there were countless immigrants leaving the lands of paternalism and statism where government's taking care of people, and coming to the land where government couldn't take care of people. No minimum wage laws. And yet the standard of living of people was soaring because of this system. So let's assume you've got a society based on that structure. Okay, well now you've got, let's say, hypothetically, another kind of society. And that's the kind of society where one group of people has the ability through government to take away the wealth that belongs to another group of people. Okay? I mean, let's take our first example where let's say people over a few generations have created a gigantic pool of wealth. And then all of a sudden, there's people in that society that don't have as much. That they're doing well, but they think it's not fair that I'm only, I only have 3 television sets and only 2 cars, and that guy's got 10, and he's got Porsche, and he's got Mercedes. I want a system where I'm going to take some of his money and bring it over to me. Or I want a system where I can take that person's money and give it to people who are truly needy. I don't want it, but I want to be able to take his money so I can be good with it and give it to the poor or the needy and so forth. All right. Well, now in this second scenario, it's a whole different ballgame, because you've got an entire sector of society that are effectively looting the productive sector. So you've got this sector, for lack of a better word, the first sector over here that's taking people's money. That's the parasitic sector. Okay, that's the one that's looking at the people that are producing and saying, I'm going to take some of that production. I want to take some of the wealth they've created. I want to bring it over and I want to put it in my pocket, or I want to put it into the pocket of somebody that I think needs it more. Well, all of a sudden, you've essentially revolutionized this way of life. I mean, you've given the power to the entire group of people, the parasitic sector, to take the money from the productive sector. Now, the goal of the parasitic sector in this kind of way of life is to keep the productive sector continually producing, because obviously the parasitic sector depends on the continued production. If the productive sector says, we're not producing anymore, we're quitting, we're going to go home, we're going to go on a permanent vacation, well, the parasitic sector is going to freak. Because now they could take out what's been produced, but that only goes so far. You do that for 5 years, and all of a sudden all the wealth has been dissipated. So the parasitic sector has to make sure that the productive sector continues producing. I mean, this is why when you see statists today saying, we've got to get the economy going again, we've got to get the economy going again, got stimulus. What they're trying to do is get the productive sector going again, so that the parasitic sector can have plenty of wealth to take away, to loot, to plunder, and so forth. To understand exactly how this thing works, consider, for example, a very healthy cow in a field. Okay, I mean, a cow is very fat, just happy and healthy, and one day a tick lands on the cow. Okay, it just starts sucking blood out of that cow. Well, for a while, the cow he's not going to notice it. I mean, he's losing a little bit of blood, but like no big deal. But the parasite, the tick, he's happy too. So you see, both people are happy. The cow's happy because he's fairly healthy. One tick, he hardly feels it. The tick just as happy as he could be because he's got all this wealth to suck off of, a great big old healthy fat cow. Well, all of a sudden, other ticks learn about this, and man, they say, "Hey, wow, let's get in on this." So other ticks start, jumping onto the cow, and they're all gorging themselves. But keep in mind something here, that if the cow dies, the parasites are finished. So it's in the interest of the ticks to keep that cow alive. So they can take out, enough blood that it doesn't kill the cow. But if they take out too much, the cow will start to teeter and finally go down. Well, when you get a lot of ticks onto the cow, each one's trying to gorge himself. And if he doesn't gorge himself, he looks at his fellow ticks and he says, oh, well, if I don't take it, somebody else will. So I might as well take as much as I can get. And so each tick is saying the same thing. If I don't take it, someone else will. So each tick is taking as much as he can. And he doesn't know when to stop. Man, you just get fatter and fatter and fatter until all of a sudden, one day, it reaches a tipping point. And the cow just starts to teeter. He's lost so much blood. He's not healthy anymore. He's bony. He's thin. And the ticks say, feed the cow more, stimulate the cow, stimulate the cow. But the cow can't handle it anymore. And finally, the cow just falls. And of course, the ticks are finished too. Well, that's what's happened with Greece. Okay, Greece, you had this great big old cow, the society, but everybody wanted to go on the dole. I mean, the dole is great, man. You can retire at 50 or whatever, and they just go and take money out of the cow, blood out of the cow, and they just give you the money, and oh wow, man, it's paradise. Except for the fact that society is starting to crater over time. The productive sector can't handle it. And this is what was happening in Greece. And the people that were on the dole, they just kept demanding more and more and more. We want more. We want more. We want more. And of course, the only one they could do is go after the productive sector to satisfy these wishes. They couldn't say no. The politicians could not say no, just like they can't say no here in the United States. And so what they started doing when the tax revenues were not enough to cover the dole, to the parasites, they just started borrowing the money. The government didn't. A lot of times they kept it secret. They just didn't tell people what they were doing. They were so scared of the dole recipients that the dole recipients would be mad if they didn't get their dole, that they just went out and started borrowing money and borrowing more and giving it to the dole recipients and secretly mounting up this huge debt. Well, the debt got so large that started draining society too, the interest on the debt. So you got all the parasites, and now you got the bondholders saying we need to be paid, and the dole recipients are saying we need to be paid, but there's not enough money. And by this time, the productive sector is shrinking. So the amount of wealth to confiscate, to pay the dole recipients and the current bills and the bondholders, it just wasn't there. And finally, the cow just died. But you see that the Greeks, they don't see it that way. I mean, they see it, we want our dole. We want our dole. And that's what all the protests are about and everything. They don't realize that the only place the government has to get the dole is from them. Or if they do realize it, they're saying, each one of them is saying, don't take the money from me. Just give me my dole, but don't tax me. Go tax my neighbor, my friend, my relatives over here. But the friends and the neighbors and the relatives are saying the same thing. So what the big battle really is whether they're going to get taxpayers in other countries to help them out with this crisis. Specifically the Germans, the American taxpayers. The Federal Reserve is involved in this. Now, we don't know to what extent. It's all secret. I mean, that's why they don't want to be audited in the Fed, because they don't want Americans to know what they're doing when these little crises come along. But it's almost a certainty that the Fed's involved with these bailouts and so forth of Europe, because you can get hints of it in the press where they say, oh, well, if there's a crisis over there, it's going to adversely affect national security over here. And it's all nonsense. But the Greek people are saying, we want our dole, and we want you, the U.S. government, to take money out of the pockets of the American people, send it to us to help us pay our debts and our dole and so forth. And the Germans, especially the Germans, that's what the big battle is with Germany, is that they have been relatively successful in terms of matching their dole with their taxes. And if the debt has increased, it isn't to such a large extent that the Greeks have done. So they're in, quote, relatively better shape. and a larger base of wealth still there. The cow is still relatively healthy. And so the Greeks are saying, well, okay, we see that healthy cow over there. We want to latch on and suck the blood out of that German cow or the American cow. Well, it really goes to show you the whole bankruptcy of the welfare state concept. I mean, that Greece cannot sustain the welfare state itself. Okay? I mean, it's just a disastrous experiment with socialism, and they can't take responsibility for it. They want other people to bail them out because they're weak. They're dependent on the dole. They can't imagine life without the dole. They're much like Americans now. That Americans have grown up with the dole, and so when you say, well, let's get rid of Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, public schooling, Americans go ballistic, right? Oh my gosh, who will take care of the poor, Jacob? Oh my gosh, if we don't have public schooling, with all that welfare for the middle class, everybody would be dumb, and oh my gosh, what if no Medicare? Oh my God, everybody'd be dying in the streets, right? Well, that's the concept. I mean, this is what the welfare state does. It creates a sense of dependency, of helplessness, of, oh, I've got to be on the dole. My government needs to be taking care of me. And but it's collapsed. I mean, nobody can deny that the welfare state is finished in Greece. Now, the statists over here are saying, print the money, stimulate the economy, stimulate the economy. And that's what, of course, they're telling the Fed to do over here. Print money, print money. But really, what is just the printing of money? All that is another tax. Inflation is a tax. I mean, that's the way, by printing the money, they're just debasing the value of the currency. They're using the money to go out and buy things with it, for example, that there's no wealth in that society. It's just paper money. And so it's a way to tax people, especially people on fixed incomes, because the people on fixed incomes, let's say they're receiving $1,000 a month. Well, if all of a sudden that $1,000 will only buy, $600 worth of goods, you've taxed that person on a fixed income to the tune of $400. And so that's all that the printing of money does. It operates as a secret, surreptitious tax. There is no way that it can produce wealth, real wealth in a society that can be then looted by the parasites. All it can do is just impoverish society even more. And for extreme examples of this, you can see it in Zimbabwe, where they had massive inflation. The Germans had massive inflation. I mean, in their history, they know what inflation can do. This is why they're so cautious about maintaining the value of their money. Even while Obama's over there saying, print up the money. We're Keynesians now over here in America. We're over here. We just spend, and print, go into debt. The Germans are saying, we've traveled down that road and we're not traveling down it again. And the Germans are smart in that sense. But over here, you've got the exact opposite situation. Now, over here, obviously, there's a lot more wealth to confiscate than there is in Greece. Bigger base. But the principle is no different. The welfare state here, it's not balanced between the payments going out and the tax revenues coming in. Not when we include the military welfare. Now, you may be surprised to say, oh, Jacob, why are you referring to military welfare? Because it is welfare. You've got the parasitic class over here domestically. But you've got the parasitic class in the military-industrial complex, the CIA, the whole military machine. They say, oh, well, no, Jacob, we're defending America's freedom. We're defending America's freedom. From whom? I don't see any nation state invading the United States. I don't see any nation state occupying the United States. I don't see a flotilla of ships coming across either ocean to invade the United States. No. What the military sector does is it creates the crises to justify its continued payment of welfare to that society. Now notice that the military sector is no more different in principle, being a parasite, than the domestic sector over here. Both sectors are dependent on the core, the center of the wealth-producing sector, the private sector. So you've got the military sector that's drawing out money from the productive sector. You've got the welfare recipients here drawing out money from the productive sector, and there's not enough tax revenues to satisfy this entire big dole. And what's very interesting is you see the welfare recipients sometimes saying, cut the military, cut the military. And then the military, which is very powerful. I mean, they control Congress, they control the presidency. To a certain extent, they can control the judiciary, because the judiciary won't touch the military. We learned that this last week when the Supreme Court had the opportunity to decide some of these cases coming out of Guantanamo. And the court said, "Hey, not us, man." And they just denied certiorari and said, we're not gonna grapple with the military. Although, a few years ago they hinted they might, not anymore. And then in the case of Padilla versus United States, another big case this week where the Federal Court of Appeals held that the military can now seize Americans and cart them away to a military dungeon or a concentration camp and torture them, hold them indefinitely. Supreme Court said, we ain't going to touch that. Padilla was taking his civil suit up on appeal and saying, you can't do that in America. Supreme Court effectively said, yeah, you can. So, you've got this huge sector that nobody's going to touch. Congress isn't going to touch. The judiciary is not going to touch. The president loves it because it's his private military. They're sucking out of the private sector. The welfare state's sucking out of the private sector. They're raising every year over $1 trillion. That's where the national debt comes in. That extra debt that they're going out and borrowing is added on to the national debt that you owe. That each of us owes like $50,000. You got a family of four, $200,000. Now, what happens if there's a crisis in this country? And the bondholders, including the Chinese, who were the principal lenders in the Iraq, Afghanistan military adventures. What happens if they want their money? How many American families families of four, can all of a sudden fork over $200,000? I would say not very many, especially in today's times. But they keep doing it. They keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Well, the welfare state's finished financially. Well, it's finished morally too. So is the warfare state. They're breaking the back of the American people. Or to put it another way, they're sucking the cow here so dry that the cow is teetering here in this country. And all they do is keep saying is, oh, inject it with another drug. That's that stimulus. Inject it with another drug. It'll get healthy again. Well, this may very well be the end of the road. It's the end of the road for Greece, unless the Germans go ahead and bail them out, which they very well may. But how long can that go on? And here in the United States, how long can it go on? And of course, this is why we've got to continue to fight. We've got to see this as an opportunity. We libertarians have to see it as an opportunity, not to reform the system. That's what conservatives do. Conservatives want to conserve and reform. They want to get, medical IRAs and Social Security IRAs. Well, there's nothing glorious about that. That's making servitude more palatable. It's making life on a plantation better for the slaves. Nothing glorious about that. What's glorious is a peaceful revolution in which we cast out the New Deal, the socialism, the welfare state, the big imperialist, the warfare state, where we restore a free market society, the type of society that I started out with this evening. Society where people are free to keep their own earnings, where they decide what to do with their own money, where there's no Social Security, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no overseas military empire, no gigantic military industrial complex that former President Eisenhower pointed out was a grave threat to our democratic processes. None of this statist junk that has come into existence in the last century. What we've got to do is take the principles of the Declaration of Independence, the original concept of the Constitution of limited government, Bill of Rights, fundamental rights of the people, God-given rights, and we need to build on that by establishing a society based on economic liberty and a constitutionally limited republic. That's the show tonight. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Good night.